Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show it's about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Dark Winds. Great season finale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So obviously we do, because I kept thinking BJ seemed like that might, even though everything was so intertwined, I was still wondering, like, could it be that BJ had nothing to do with the blonde man? There was still a part of me wondering that, because I'm like, even with everything going on, I felt like it felt too obvious, but it's like, no, it is what it is. It's just like the trail there, you had to go with the twists, not necessarily twists and turns, but follow the evidence to kind of understand why it was BJ and what his motivation was behind. I mean, it seemed pretty obvious, because it's kind of like evil like a businessman type of situation. But when the blonde man made his way to BJ, and when BJ pulled a gun on him, I almost like, wait, does he not, like, do you guys not know each other? But it's like, wait, like, you're here, he's like, right, like, Lee Porn has kind of figured stuff out. Granted, he doesn't have the evidence. I was so interested to see how that scene played out, because I'm like, it seems like either one of you could kill each other. Like, I could see the blonde man killing BJ. I could see BJ killing the blonde man, which he ultimately did. But I was like, it just, because they're both loose ends to each other. So I don't know why the blonde man was so willing to trust BJ. I mean, he literally had you wipe out everyone else that was anyone that could know the truth about anything, and yet you still thought he was just going to let you go. You were the final piece of the puzzle. Now that, like, every other loose end had kind of been taken care of, you even admitted that Joe doesn't even have the evidence to prove any connection between the two of you. So, but I still thought, out of self-preservation, he would have killed BJ ahead of time. But I guess he wanted to believe BJ for whatever reason. But I was like, because especially that scene, especially when he was walking away, I was like, the way this is shot, you're seeing BJ in the background. I was like, come on. I was like, yep, he went inside, came right back out with a gun. I'm like, yeah. I'd almost halfway expected. I was like, is the blonde man going to turn around and shoot him or something? I was like, no. And what are the last words out of his mouth? Linda. Like I said, we now know his mom's dead. So I guess we'll never really fully know his circumstances, because he's just a hired gun. That's all there is to it. Like, I've got no sympathy for him. It's like, after all the death and destruction he's caused, yeah, he got what he deserved, The sad thing is, it's just, like, it's a good thing it wasn't Joe who did it, but it would have felt more, you feel better about it if it was Joe. BJ killing him is just like, no, that's just BJ cover. It's like, oh, one bad guy killing another bad guy because he's covering his tracks. That's all there is to it. So like I said, I guess, like, that's all there was to it. Like, we got his backstory a little bit last episode, and all you can do is just surmise from there. Like I said, he killed his mom, and he's so messed up in the head that he's still trying to find his mom out there in the world, knowing that she won't be there. But it's like, yeah, I took her out of this world for my respective reasons, or whatever the case may be. So, but yeah, later on when Jim showed up, they're like, first and foremost, he was checking in on Rosemary. Well, specifically her and Gabriella, the maid, because he hadn't, like, they both disappeared last night. And, I mean, to be fair, BJ was disposing of the body, so he didn't really have time to clean up before. But it's like, yeah, you got blood on your fingers. This is like the 70s, so I don't know when DNA technology first really popped up. It's going to be some years later, because I just looked something up that was like, DNA fingerprinting was first used in a case in, like, 1986 in the UK, I think I was reading. So, like I said, we're still away from that. So it's not like they would have been able to piece it together, be like, oh, this is the blonde man's DNA. Like, I mean, once again, there's no, like, database system at this point in time. Maybe there is, but obviously it's not what it is today. It wouldn't be like that easy to access, even if there was one at this time. So it's not like it would have done him any good. Like, he didn't even cover it up. There was no questions asked about, oh, what's that blood about? Why you got your gun? And it's like, well, and why'd you have the shovel? It's like, well, he could easily lie and be like, well, I mean, you don't know where he disposed of the blonde man's body, so there's nothing like you could really pull from that anyway. He could always just lie and be like, yeah, I was hunting, like, some deer or something, like, I was hunting, so there's no point in really questioning, because there's not much you can really follow through on that. So I did think it was interesting where it's like, Cheeb did say, like, hey, like, BJ, like, you can kind of steal our culture, but it doesn't stop you from walking down, what was it, the dark road, which I'm like, I think he said the dark road, I can't remember the exact word, but it was something, a specific road, I guess it's like, was it like the black road or the dark road or something like that? And I wonder, is that supposed to be kind of connected to how BJ's story ends? It feels like that was kind of, it was definitely foreshadowing his circumstances, but I'm not fully sure what she meant by that. I don't know if that's supposed to be an indication of, yes, you can try and steal our culture and everything, but you'll never, who you are doesn't change. Like, you're still kind of like it doesn't change the path, and like, kind of like the road to hell is where you're going, and you're still on that road no matter how much you try and like cleanse yourself with kind of like, because he's like, yeah, I don't believe in witches, but I see in first and foremost that you do, and with everything you're doing with the people of darkness. So, and even like, oh, what happened to Rosemary? It's like, oh, don't worry, she'll get what's coming to her. Like, you know, she dug her own grave or something like that. And because I think at the time he still didn't have any proof, but he knew about the affair. He just couldn't act upon it, I guess. Which, since I'm on that trail, I'm gonna pick up with Rosemary, which she does show up and she is without her oxygen tank. So I'm like, oh, did BJ actually help her? Or was it a thing of she actually, once again, it's hard to say. Like, I know she was hoping that Gabriella would steal whatever she was going to steal from BJ. Like I said, I'm assuming it was money, but I don't know. But she got quote unquote healed. So I don't know if she was actually believing in it. Like, maybe it gave her a little bit more time, because she was like, yeah, I don't need it now. But then later on, when she was kind of stressing her out, she kind of needed it again. So I guess that's what he meant by like, oh yeah, like, yeah, she's going to come to me for healing, but yeah, she ain't going to have me, or like, that would have been the last time I was going to help her. And whatever comes her way is just going to be hers to deal with, because I'm not going to help her, because obviously, like, none of my money's going to go to her. It's hers. So she needs to kind of find her own way, because everything money-wise from her father belongs to him now. So there was no getting around that for her. So that's why I think she just ultimately decided to. Because this was the episode where everything, like, they finally, like, pieced everything together. Because combining the cheese stuff with the Joe situation, because Joe ends up going with his dad to investigate the Drumco explosion site of the well, because he's piecing everything together. It's like, okay, so I don't have enough evidence to tie BJ to the blonde men, but there's a lot of evidence, but none of it's like concrete. He doesn't have any actual proof, but he pieces it together. He's like, okay, so we know about the fake fake geography reporter or whatever about the Drumco, and it's like, right. They find out later on there is a fake report saying like there was no uranium, when in actuality there was a whole bunch of uranium in there. And that's where Dylan comes into play. Dylan falsified stuff because he was on a good enough relationship with BJ so that the Drumco explosion can happen, and then BJ is able to buy it on the cheap. So what really kickstarted, like, this all started back then, and yes, Dylan died like 2 years ago, which I guess that was my misunderstanding. I thought the whole point was like he died a year before the explosion, but maybe they were kind of implying like roughly a year after the explosion is when he died. I thought they said before, but because it's like, oh, the Drumco explosion was like almost like 4 years ago, and Charlie died almost 2 years ago. And I guess it was maybe an accident. I mean, they never really confirmed that he, like, obviously we know he killed Emerson and Thomas, but I kept being like, well, the fact is, does that mean you killed Dylan too? But maybe Dylan did, just maybe it was kind of like, maybe Dylan would view it as a little bit of a karma situation of what he did. But it turns out Emerson knew what his brother had did, and he was dying, and so he didn't want to die, as Joe put it, having his brother's stain on his soul. So he wanted to come clean. So that's why he got Thomas to steal the box from Rosemary, which Joe didn't know it, because she was still sitting on that piece of like, oh, like Thomas is the one that she was having an affair with. Well, I think he figured as much, but I don't think obviously it's not until he found the photos and developed them that he had the proof of it. So, but it adds validity to Joe's theory. But I do think he legitimately, maybe he was playing the long game, but at the very least, I do believe that he probably did actually fall for her. Like, it's like, oh, I was meant to get the box. I mean, who knows? Maybe they were having an affair already and Emerson knew about it. He was like, right, well, since you're already over there doing your thing, whatever, I'm not going to stop you. Why don't you take advantage of that situation and try and get the box? That's going to have proof of what has really been going on. But once again, he has no actual proof, but that's why Joe is bringing his dad with him, because it's like, right, you are a bomb expert, and maybe we can find some evidence of you. Cause we can now re-examine this scene, because yes, anyone that came across that scene all those years ago wouldn't have looked at it as like, oh, this was a purposeful thing, because everyone's under the impression, oh, it was an accident. So there was no deeper investigation on any part. Everyone just assumed like, oh, it was just a freak accident. But now you have to look through the lens, and Joe's dad, Henry's like, okay, so he would have put the bomb up here. It would have exploded out. So let's check within a certain radius to try and see if we can find any bomb pieces. Because once a bomb person finds something that works, typically they'll keep with it. So the signature aspects of that bomb, what they use and everything, will pretty much stay the same, because you found something. So like, hey, you found something that works. So why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing. And it becomes kind of like part of his, kind of like how a killer or whatever could have their signature that they just, it's just part of their thing. It's kind of become a part of him now with the bomb. So they ended up finding the pieces to kind of connect, because it's like, right, it's the same blue wiring that was used for Emerson, and that was used at the Drumco explosion. And oh, it was also in the toy that was given to Thomas's son. But obviously, we all come together, like I said, all three. You have Bernadette, Joe, and Jim putting all together the evidence about, okay, so Thomas took pictures of the original geography report. Now, the fact is, he did that before it was changed too. I wonder, how did he know it was potentially about to get changed? Did he get lucky in that regard? Because if he didn't maybe that could have been like well in advance. Who knows how far in advance he had taken that before BJ had it changed, before the one that he had submitted that allowed him to kind of buy Drumco and all that stuff. So that's why he was able to buy it severely on the cheap and everything. So I just realized I am skipping over some pretty important stuff, but I'll kind of finish this up by tying it in with the Rosemary stuff and then circle back to the other stuff. But the Rosemary situation, it's so interesting because she kind of pieces it together that, okay, so the reason why you hired me to go after the box that Thomas stole is because it had evidence of your affair with Thomas, because he had pictures and stuff. So, but it was a double thing of, one, I wanted to make sure you get me that box back. But two, you also kind of wanted Thomas to take the box because you were hoping that he would have found that geography or geology or that land study and found out about like the discrepancy between what was there and what wasn't. Obviously, Blonde Man burned most of it, but they ended up finding like obviously the published of the on record, and the one that Thomas took a photo of, the original. So she kind of had twofold to her circumstance, and it's just like, I feel like her plan in the long run was basically she wanted to take BJ down. Once again, like all the money is tied up on him, and none of that would have gone to her. So I was wondering, like, considering she's bailing now, I'm curious, because she knows like BJ's on the cusp of figuring out. So it's like, right, I can't be around him anymore. I just got to disappear. Plus, he's kind of done with me. So if he found out about the affair, he would have divorced her. She would have definitely walked away with nothing. And maybe she also knows who he is. Because she did say like, oh, I was just trying to protect my husband. But it was also self-preservation on her part. But I guess like maybe she wanted to like protect herself and get on the outs, and then kind of deuces, give him the middle finger on the way out by having. Maybe she never knew it was going to turn out this way with Thomas getting the photos and stuff. Like she never expected things to turn out this way. Like it's hard to say fully what was. She's not directly involved in all of this, but she did kind of spark at least the investigation side of things with Jim by involving him in this. But she's like, oh, like me being little old me, who would actually believe that I could come up and mastermind something like that? She's like, I could. But it's interesting because she tried to like convince him to go with her because it's like, right, we're both people who have kind of lived our lives trying to find somewhere where we belong. We both thought we did, but we didn't. We're kind of still drifters. And hey, you ever been to what's it, Acapulco? And it's like, oh, I can't go. I'd be lonely kind of going there by myself. And Jim's like, well, I'm sure there's other brown people there to help you. She's like, really? I mean, come on, you can come along too. And he's like, no, I feel right. This is where I belong. Thanks. And she's like, yeah, you keep telling yourself that. So, I mean, obviously, we're never going to probably see Rosemary again, but because once again, I don't know whether she just did the whole BJ thing of like last episode with the People of Darkness just to give herself a little more time away from him, like give herself a little bit more time, and because once again, she still needs the oxygen tank. Even I think maybe she just wanted to present a stronger front in front of Jim to kind of, I don't know. But I could also see that line from Jim being like, right, you're kind of a little femme fatale-esque, but maybe it's also like, yeah, you had an affair with a brown person, like, that's all I would be. It's like, that's why it's like, yeah, there's plenty of brown people to hold your leg. It's like, that's all we are, like, just kind of what Thomas was to you was kind of a side piece. It did seem like she was legitimately hurt when she found out that he died, because she did, I think, legitimately cared for him. But like Jim's like, yeah, I'm not just going to be your substitute brown person. There's plenty of brown people you can pull from when you go there. So there's that side of things. An angle to this I had skipped over, a very important angle to discuss, is before the trio pieced everything together, Henry was talking to Joe about, right, this is what's going to happen. You're going to arrest BJ, take him in front of a judge, and then like all the charges, he's going to get released on bail, and then all the charges are going to be dropped. How I know? He's like, because that's the way things are. There's justice for them, for white folks, and then there's justice, and then there's Indian justice for us. And, but Joe was like, right, things were like that one way, but things have changed. He's like, yes, things have changed, but there's also things that haven't changed. And because even Bernadette was kind of like brushing it off, like, it's not going to go down that way. It's like, yeah, because sadly money does talk, and BJ has plenty of money and influence. I mean, Henry even said, like, yeah, in front of the judge who he ended up putting in that position. And it's like, Henry knew exactly how this goes, because it's, it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same in a lot of ways. And ultimately, he was right. It played out exactly the way, especially it was kind of such a hard hit too for Joe, because for him, it's like, right, I'm going to do things the right way. When it came to the blonde man, he could have put the blonde man down, but he didn't. It's like, regardless of who he worked for, because he needed to find out who was at the heart of this, but he still could have put the blonde man down because, hey, you killed my son. Once again, he's dead now. I don't know if they don't really know that in the episode, but also because they're probably under the assumption like, right, he got away and he disappeared. There's no getting him back. It's like, once again, he's 6 feet under now. I mean, I don't know. Joe will probably never really fully know that, but maybe he can, because they never really brought it up in the episode, because they just assume like the blonde man's gone, I guess, and like he's just out there. And maybe on some level they didn't really think about it, because it's like, yeah, because if he's connected to BJ most likely covered his tracks. Maybe that's how they just, because like I said, they never really worried about the blonde man anymore. But like I said, maybe it's just it's nothing we can do about it. He's gone. There'd be no way of like tracking him down now that he's kind of in the wind. But especially after that moment at home with Emma and Sally, and just like, oh yeah, like her son laughs, and there's a ceremony for the first laugh, because for them it's like it's a symbolism of the baby becoming an actual person, going from being just a spirit to an actual full blown person. So, and that actually is going to tie into something I'm going to talk about later with Sally, but I'll go ahead and like start it here. I was so I was so surprised, because I was like, okay, Sally's around for some of the episodes, so I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, after her conversation with Emma, I want to say that was last episode, I would have thought she would have been going. Obviously, she has very complicated feelings about having given birth to her son, and just like what that's all attributed to, and just she didn't want to grow resistant and hating her son, and she like he didn't deserve that, and so she wanted him to have a healthy. So like, she was feeling conflicted about it, and I had even said last episode I wasn't sure what decision Sally was going to make. And once again, I wanted to kind of start that there, but I'll tie it back in and talk about it more later when we talk about what Sally ultimately ends up doing. So there's that, but it's such a joyous moment, and Joe's like, all right, I'll be the one, we'll have the ceremony here, I'll put it all together, because it is kind of my fault, I'm the one that made him laugh. but then he walks by the TV and sees exactly what his father said would happen ended up happening. And that was such a gut-wrenching thing of like, right, I try to do things the right way. I try to do things to justify, I try to do things the good way to be a good person, but it amounted to nothing when rich and powerful people like BJ, once again, there's white justice and then there's like Indian justice. And even Henry has said, like, I want all those people that died, all the Charlies, and my grandson to get Indian justice. But he's like, I don't even think that will happen. Because the Indian justice made me go like, yeah, that sounds like someone needs to pop a cap in his ass type of situation. Someone needs to put him down like the rabbit beast that he is type of situation. Rather than kind of like go through because that system isn't built for us. It's meant to benefit people like BJ, not us. It's not going to do right by us. It'll do wrong by us by doing right by people like BJ who should be taken down by that very system, but it benefits them and they're able to use their money and power and influence to sway justice, to turn a blind eye to them. Even though justice, it's supposed to be blind in regards of like everyone's equal, but talked about it recently in something else. The system is not equal across the board. Even though it should be, it's not. And especially when you tie that in, because the other thing I forgot to talk about is Joe went to see Cena and was telling him about, Cena had told him about a situation. He was like bringing up this whole point of when you kill someone, basically they don't go away. Because he'd asked Joe, he's like, oh, have you ever killed anyone before? And Joe's like, I've been a part of it, but no, I've never directly taken a life before. And back when he was in the war. And so Cena talks about a time of he was responding to a domestic abuse situation, a domestic situation. A husband has shot his wife to death, and then he was going to try and hang himself, but he couldn't do it because killing yourself will send you to hell, and he couldn't live without her, and he couldn't commit suicide. So what he did was commit suicide by cop. And Cena's like, I stayed with him until I stayed right there underneath that tree with him until the ambulance came, and he died just as the ambulance got there. But it's like, I was the last thing he saw in this world. So when the person died, like whoever you kill, when you're the last thing they see, they're bound to you in this world. They're always with you in this world or the next. And Cena's just kind of being like, that's kind of, I think, a regret of like that. It's something that almost like stains you and it stays with you no matter what the circumstances are. Taking a life in general, it stays with you because almost like they're almost like a shadow that walks with you. Like it stays kind of like it's almost like a stain on your heart and your soul that you can't quite get rid of. It's always there with you. And the moment they had introduced that element, I was like, okay, so Joe's going to have a decision to make because that's foreshadowing his circumstances, which it does. He shows up at BJ's because he wanted revenge. It's like, if I'm not going to get justice the right way, I'm going to get justice my way. And BJ, even at the very end, will never admit the truth of what happened. It's like, right, so why? You could have just waited until everyone left, but why did you have to do it while people were in there? And Joe never got an answer, and it could go either one of two ways. One, that wasn't his decision. Like the decision to wait for the most casualties, that might have been Home Dude's decision, the blonde man's. It might have been his decision, or it could just as easily been like, no, BJ wanted there to be death because death would have made it even cheaper. Because an explosion's one thing, but an explosion that 6 people died in, Native Americans or not, it's still going to be a situation of that body toll on top of it cheapens the price even more. He never says that, but like I said, we will never actually really know. But considering who BJ is, I could easily see it being a thing of, yes, those 6 bodies dropped the price tag on Drumco even bigger. So it made it even more of a steal type of situation. Or am I getting that backwards in my head? Like, do correct me in the comments down below, because I keep trying to think, like, wait, so, because he had the whole, like, okay, so the place, because the study was done before the explosion, right? Or was the study done after the explosion? I don't remember, about there being no uranium. I don't remember. That's why I'm kind of clearing up, because now I'm confused in my head of, like, am I thinking about that wrong? Because he bought Drumco after the explosion, right? because I keep thinking like he bought it before the explosion and got it on it cheaper because there was no uranium, even though there was uranium in there. But I think it's like, no. He definitely bought it after the fact. I hope I'm getting that right, because I feel like I'm getting that backwards in my head. I was so sure, but now I'm like second guessing myself. I'll keep going down the path of, it's kind of a moot point, but I feel like I'm getting those details wrong, and I hope I'm not. Either way, it's still the thing of like, I do believe BJ specifically asked because like he wanted there to be more casualties. So once again, it's not like specifically wanted to be Joe Jr. He just happened to be sadly in the wrong place at the wrong time. Even the blonde man was like, yeah, like your kid wasn't anyone important. He just happened to be a casualty, and that just makes it even worse. So like, yeah, he was just a byproduct of BJ's plans and stuff. But it's like, yeah, you this thing from like what was that hand of like the thing he had taken off of the blonde man's body. I don't know if it's like a clock or whatever, the thing that swings back and forth that's got that little gold metal piece to it. Like, it's like, yeah, you kept it on your desk. You should have put it in a safe like you did my son's belt buckle and everything, But it's like maybe he didn't, well, once again, he probably didn't have enough time in between everything going on, she showing up. But I mean, he had enough time to get like a massage and stuff. So maybe he was just too cocky and never expected anyone to show up to kind of piece that together. But Joe took him and was taking him on this path, and he's like, oh, do you know about the long walk? What was like 200 miles. He's like, 200 years ago, my ancestors had to walk a path, no food, no water, barefoot, because of people like you and your ancestors, And it was just kind of more symbolic of just kind of like, right, you're getting people like you continuing to get away with atrocities that you've caused my people, whether it's what's happening 200 years ago, whether it's the Drumco situation now, and you kind of being able to just walk away scot-free, charges potentially dropping and stuff. And so Joe is going to put him down, like I said, the rabbit beast that he is, but then Joe doesn't pull the trigger. In fact, Joe just leaves him to walk that path. It's like, right, my ancestors walked this path, and what happened to them? Let's see if you're fortunate enough. And we find out he's not. He ends up dying out there, because the desert gets extremely cold. That is always the interesting thing about nature of just how the desert works. It's like it's scorching hot during the day, freezing cold at night. It's so interesting how that works. You'd almost expect it to be hot all, like that was always my understanding. I was like, oh, a desert gets cold at night? That made no sense to me, because I'm like, but either way, I attribute it to he froze to death because it was like in the middle of the night when he was left out there, so he couldn't get, it's so far off the beaten path, so like, he was just out there alone and he froze to death. He got what was his. And that's the thing of, yes, because I also love that scene too, because it speaks volumes about what Senna had brought up earlier in the episode, because Joe made him face the other way. He's like, Neil was going to shoot him from behind, that way when he dies, it's like your eyes aren't looking, Joe isn't the last thing he sees, because he said, I want the souls of all those who died on the long walk. I want them to be the last thing you see. A reminder of just what you've done and just what you're trying to continue to get away with, to our people, like what's been done to them in the past, and people like you continuing to do stuff now. But also, Joe didn't want to be bound by someone like BJ, especially the man responsible who had a role in his son's death. So it's a good, and that also plays into a good thing he didn't actually shoot the blonde man. But I guess you can make the argument the blonde man is forever tied to BJ because, well, it's hard to say because the last thing he saw might have been that crow or bird in the tree, or it might have been BJ. It's hard to say in that regard. So that's an interesting thing. But it's more so like I technically didn't kill him, but it doesn't make it any easier because BJ's death is still on him regardless. Because, yeah, I might not have pulled the trigger, but I still left him to his death, so it doesn't absolve me of it. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing that Joe's going to have to, deal with, Because, yes, he got justice for his son, but it's like, did I really go about it the right way doing that, So that's going to stay with Joe, so I think that's interesting. It seems like Senna might know about that, because when he showed up, Joe was kind of halfway later on during the laughing ceremony that Joe halfway expected him to say something about that, but it turns out he's there because he's retiring. Because for him, it's like, well, he brought up like, oh, the judge is bringing those charges back up on BJ. He's actually, there's a warrant, no, not the charges, but a warrant's out for him because he skipped his court date. And so like, yeah, there's a warrant out for him, but it's like, yeah, no one's seen him and he hasn't tapped into his accounts or anything. And Joe's like, yeah, that is interesting. And it's like, that's all Cena needed to know, because it's like, if you were like, you would be very upset if you found out the man that was responsible for your son's death is still in the wind. It's like, it's a mutual thing of, we both know what's what. And I even love that he said that line to Joe, like, if I were you, I'd run, pause, for my position in office. But for Joe's like, I'm comfortable where I am. I'm just not I'm not into that political game or whatever. I'm not fit for that world. But I wonder, is that something that happens to Joe maybe later on? I mean, either like someone else is going to step up and potentially fill that void in the future, and that's going to turn into a whole thing, or maybe eventually later on like I said, there are a lot of books. Because the author who wrote a lot of books, and I believe it's his daughter, maybe his granddaughter, but I'm fairly sure it's his daughter, because I remember talking about this in the first season. His daughter has continued writing the books since his passing. I don't know if it was like a long time after his passing that she continued the books, or was it pretty soon afterwards, but I think she's currently the one writing the book. I think the books are still ongoing. The most recent one came out last year. So, but yes, I looked it up too. It's his daughter. The author's name is Tillerman? Tony Hillerman. And his daughter Anne is the one who has picked up continued the Lee Porn and Chi novels. But either way, we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on with some Bernadette stuff. I wanted to kind of include that in. Hopefully I remember to. But my point is, I was wondering if maybe like that eventually becomes something that she goes on and write, or is that just, like I said, just picking up like that, dropping that notion like, oh, that's still that vacuum that's open of like someone's going to fill that, and what that means for Chi. Because even he's like, oh, the BJ thing, that's not going to be my issue anymore because I'm retiring. I'm doing it to save my marriage. I think it also ties into that experience he had with the Blonde Man, because I forgot to talk about it. It was this very like powerful moment because he's kind of tearing up because he played possum. He was so scared of what would happen if he opened his eyes, because he's like, if I opened my eyes, the Blonde Man would have killed me, and he would have been the last thing I would have saw, and I wouldn't want to be tied and bound to him. And Lee Porn was like, yo, it's okay. You were in shock and you were hurt. And Cena was like, yeah, let's go with that, rather than like, you know. And I think it's understandable. Like, no, you were afraid, you were scared, like an chief position or whatever as a cop. It doesn't matter. Like you're afraid, and when you're afraid, and you know, and fear kind of like dictated that situation for him, and he kind of felt shame. And I think just that, and just like never wanted to be in that situation again. But like he also said, like to save his marriage, he doesn't want to ever be in. So he's retiring. So. But I even love when Joe walked away and his dad was nearby. He's like, how much of that did you hear? He's like, because he's like, how long were you there? He was like, your whole life, or something like that. I was like, oh, that's and his dad kind of probably pieces it all together, because he's the one that brought it up to Joe about the Indian Justice. So he's like, I know what you did, and it's fine. I'm not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about it. Well, we'll probably talk about it if you want to talk about it. But it's like, I think everyone has, especially, you know, it's just carrying stuff inside and not letting anyone really in, you know? But we also have the whole situation with Bernadette. She decides that she's going to take the job. We know that she got accepted, but she officially takes the job. Now, what really pushed her over the edge is BJ getting away. When she has to realize, like, wow, Henry was right. The law applies to us in one way, and then people like BJ another. And for her, it's like, things shouldn't be like that. So I'm going to go and take this job, I guess, because for her, it's like, I need the change, but I think it's like, maybe this is a job where I can actually do some good and kind of rise up the ranks there and change things so that the law does apply to even people like BJ. And Joe knew that she was going to go. He figured as much. And in that moment when she was like, they hugged and everything, and then she walked away, and he was like, daughter, she's like, I know. I was like, that was a beautiful, because I don't think he's ever, like, she's always been like a daughter to him, but I don't know if he's ever outright called her his daughter. But it's like, he's like, I think was about to say, like, I love you and your family. You always have a place there. I think for her, it's just, you don't even have to say anything, Joe. I know. I thought it was a beautiful moment. And I even love with Bernadette's exit, because earlier like, I think it was after the BJ situation, after he left BJ to like just to his own devices to die, he ended up melting down JJ's belt buckle and ended up making a feather from it. And we never found out. We went so much as like, okay, so is he going to give it to Sally? And I thought it was something for the laughing ceremony. I thought it was something related to Sally and her baby. No, he gave it to Bernadette. I was like, that's beautiful for that to be like, oh, one of the last things we see in the episode. I thought that was kind of a nice reveal because it's poetic, because it's like, right, kind of wanted to give her a gift to carry on with her, but also it's like, it's his way of kind of finally letting go of JJ a little bit, but also letting Bernadette keep a little bit of her, brother with her. So, and it's like, you are family, and this will remind you of the family that's back home waiting for you. So that's how I interpret that, and I thought that was kind of a beautiful gesture. But anyway, I was bringing it up before about Anne Hillerman having obviously taking over for her father when it comes to the books. So that's the thing of like, having reread it again, the lines I was reading, once again, I'm basing this on like some Wikipedia articles I was like quickly glancing through. So I knew that Bernadette becomes more of a core character later on in the show. So I don't know if the character already existed back when her dad was writing the stories, but definitely when she picked up the story, she made Bernadette a permanent fixture in the story. So that's why I'm curious, like, did she have a minor role before it now became a main part of that? Like, it's a trio of investigators, or was she not even a character at all? And then Anne introduced Bernadette and made her a key part in all of that. Because that makes me go like, well, because she's a key part of the book, so that means like, if there's a future for the show, like maybe you'd cut back and forth with what she's doing at Border Patrol, and that kind of eventually leads her back home, like, not unless that's kind of where that's going, or because I would assume you would almost think like there's no way this is like actually Bernadette's exit from the show. It kind of sets it up like that, but I doubt like I feel like there'd probably be something that would bring her back home, but maybe I'm mistaken in that part. But like I said, because the books are designed at least later on for her to be a main character in it, so like I said, I'm assuming they just kind of brought her up earlier in the show. Then maybe she was, like, in those earlier books, like I said, maybe she was a minor character, maybe she wasn't a character at all, but maybe they kind of brought her up and made her more of a key fixture from the beginning of this story, since she's already, like, a key fixture in the canon of the books anyway, They just, when they're adapting it to these TV shows, they just kind of, like, brought her character forward to be a main part of this, rather than just be focusing purely on this duo, making it Bernadette a part of that as a trio. So I just thought that was dope. Another angle to this, I talked about it earlier, and I want to tie back into is the whole Sally of it all. Now that was really interesting to me. That, like I brought up earlier, I didn't know what decision Sally was going to make, and the fact is that she was still sticking around after everything last episode. I was like, oh, maybe she had changed her mind. But then when she was leaving the note for Emma and Joe, I was like, oh, so she hasn't. So she's going to leave the child with Emma and Joe, but then like she turns around and her baby is on her back. I was like, no, she's leaving with her baby. Interesting, because I was kind of leaning more towards, I thought she might leave the child and just kind of leave him with Joe and Emma, or trying to find him another home. But I think it's like, no, we're sticking through this together. Rough and complicated things alone. Like, you're still my son, and I'm gonna look after you. Not unless that is her way of eventually finding him a new home, but that was her leaving of like, yeah, you guys have been so kind to me, but I think for her it's like, we've kind of got to go out on our own. I don't know if that's going to be like the last we potentially see of Sally, Maybe she gave Joe and Emma an idea of where she's going, and so like, right, they can visit her son anytime, maybe. I don't know. That's just I wasn't expecting the story to play out that way. I was like, but I was so curious to see how that Sally situation was going to play out, Once again, whether we get more of that in the future, we'll have to wait and see. I'd also skipped over it when I was talking about the Bernadette of it all, was Chi showing up, because now that Bernie's going, he decided to help out Leaphorn for a while, because I got to fill those shoes, those enormous Sasquatch feet. And she's like, all right, I'd rather have big feet than small hands. And he looks, he's like, I don't have little hands. And she's like, yeah, you sure about that? And they do have this moment where they do kiss, and for her, it's like, geez, if you had just come back sooner. He's like, yeah, sorry. You know? It is kind of sad how they are kind of ships passing in the night in a way, you know? And obviously, when the scene ends the way it does, with them both driving in opposite direction, it kind of made me think about the Batman, because I know, like, it made me think of, like, oh, I'm curious, like, if someone watched this scene, would they feel, because I know someone being like, oh, they didn't like how long that scene dragged on for in the Batman when they were going to go their separate ways. I kind of got a similar vibe from this. Not like the scene was going on for a long time, but I was just thinking in the back of my head, like, would people have the same issue like they did with the Batman? That's just where my mind went, but it is interesting where I think also Bernie making a promise to, what was the character's name? Is it Dennis? The guy who went off to join the army. And once again, the fact is the vehicle disappeared like that. That's just could like just a way of like, yeah, just it going in the distance and how long they waited kind of staring off in the distance for the vehicle to disappear. Or it's supposed to be it's supposed to represent the fact is none of them made it back home. That could be indicative of that. Bernie did make a promise, but I think maybe she can kind of keep that promise to some extent. So, but maybe she was also making that promise knowing she wasn't going. She still hadn't fully decided anything last episode about whether or not she was going to go or not. But obviously, once again, the whole BJ of it all made her go like, you know, Vine's situation made her go like, no, I'm going. I had to say it because like the BJ of it all, I was like, that's why I had to go like the Vines of it all. Pushed her to decide to go to Customs and Border Patrol. And then like the last shot of the episode being Joe and Emma like riding on the bike. I guess it's kind of it is that, once again, it's that thing of there's no moving past their pain. There's no like getting over their pain. It's just moving through and kind of learning to kind of live with it. And I think for Joe, there's other circumstances to that situation for him. Now with the whole Vine situation playing out the way it did, but he kind of, I think, was able to kind of find his way forward. And Emma did as well, because Mary had written her story, but I mean, obviously it's Emma's story. And Emma talked about it, and it was this beautiful line, and I think really ties into the ending, is her saying that their son gave them more love in this world than they could ever imagine. And maybe her and Joe never would have had another child because of that. But at the end of the day, that would have been her decision and not the government and not the doctors to make that decision for her. No, she specifically said the doctors or the American government to make that decision for me. So for Emma, it's like, go ahead and publish it. But it's like, right, this, like putting your name out there, telling this, like letting people know what you're doing here and making sure that other Native women don't get sterilized. Like that will cause problems once they know what you're going to do. But for her, it's like, because it's like, oh, it's going to be a risk if I publish this. And for Emma, it's like, yeah, it's too much of a risk if you don't. Because she wants the word out there so that any other women reading that can know you have a place here where I will help you. I will make sure like that information is out there, letting you know that these doctors will sterilize you. They will take away your ability to have children, you know. And I'm here doing my part to help. So I'm here as a helping hand if you need it, but also to kind of put the word out there also about what the American government is doing to Indigenous women. So finding her way forward through all of it as well. Like, and that's why I think that ending is so beautiful, of just them on the bike together, driving off in the distance. I think it's just kind of like it's a new dawn for them in so many capacities, kind of able to kind of stepping out a little bit more into the light after all the darkness has kind of surrounded them. Because even the whole laughing ceremony, Joe was saying like, right, you were saying that this place needs to be kind of put back more in balance. And I think things have found some form of balance, and I think things will probably get complicated for Emma going forward. And like I said, the aftermath of all the divine stuff for Joe, this is probably going to stick with him as well. But for now, though, I think that was just kind of a nice way to kind of ultimately wrap everything up. At the time of me recording this, Dark Winds has not been renewed. It hasn't been confirmed what the status of the show is going to be. I'm sure it's going to be in that complicated. So I'm sure it always comes down to numbers, how many people are watching. That will always push a network to decide whether or not to bring a show back. Obviously, the show is not short on any material to pull from, obviously. But there's also the whole situation of we are currently in the middle of a WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike, so that's probably going to play a decent role in that decision making on that part. So hopefully the show gets a third season. I hope the show goes on as long as like the creators behind it want to keep going and the people involved want to keep going. I never want a show to kind of just end just because like a network. I would rather a show end on the creators' choice and decisions. So hopefully we'll be able to not just only get a season 3, but even a season 4, just however long the creators are able to go about the show and want to go about the show. So we'll ultimately have to wait and see. Like I said, I've got my fingers crossed, hopeful for a season 3, because I'd love to see where things would go from here. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.